let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them. Those who are being tortured, as though you yourselves were being tortured. Let marriage be held in honour by all. And let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. He has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my help, I will not be afraid. What can anyone do for me? Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider, remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life. And imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Amen. The Lord bless thee for us.
Well, good morning and welcome. Nice and fresh this morning. Take heart in the thought that in a couple of weeks I'm going to be a heck of a lot colder than this. Mind you, when we were living up in the Victorian Highlands, it certainly got cold, but you most often didn't feel it. I think we were a little bit sheltered by the wind and by our 4 layers of clothes, woolly beanies, and enjoying our fires. So, yeah, there is differences, isn't there? Okay. That was a little bit of a different reading today, and I was going through the book of Hebrews, and I thought this is something that really the Lord would have us talk about and share. And it reminded me a bit of a fridge note. I know we don't do them so often these days because we've got mobile phones and I forgot to tell someone something. Send off a text or ring them up. But it wasn't like that. And it wasn't that many years ago that if we weren't going to be home when the kids got home from school, or if you were going to be out and your husband or your wife got home, and you'd have a note stuck on the fridge. And of course you stuck it on the fridge because when the kids got home from school, what's the first thing they do? Hi Mum, I'm home, what's tea? Right. So you put it there, hoping that they would see it. No guarantees, but you'd hope. And of course you'd have on this note a whole lot of little instructions. And it'd probably read something like, dinner is in the fridge. Turn the oven to such and such a temperature and put it in at 5 o'clock, and that way dinner will be ready when I get home. Make sure you do your homework, feed the dog, and don't go tying up your little brother again. And of course we went one stage further. We had TV notes because when we were away, Michelle would put notes on the TV. What did they used to say, Michelle?
Would Jesus be happy to sit next to you while you were watching this program?
You got that? Would Jesus be happy sitting next to you watching this program? Yeah, we used to leave notes around. As I come to this passage, this closing passage, and it's very typical of what we have in the New Testament letters. It's very much like God's fridge note to us. We've been through this letter where the apostle, whether it be Paul or whether it be Peter, whoever was writing at the time, James, they would explain some great ideas and doctrines to us. And then they get to the end of the letter and they think, oh, hang on, I've got to leave the fridge now. Not that they would have called it that. I don't think they knew what fridges were. But they wanted to leave us those final bullet point instructions. And here we've got some. Now let's have a look at them. Let brotherly love continue is verse 1 of Hebrews 13. It's abide in love, live in love. That this brotherly love should be part of each and every day. That it's something that should mark our lives and not just those moments when we're together. That it is the caring for one another. And then he moves on and starts talking about hospitality. Now, I've got to tell you, in last few weeks, Michelle and I have had a little bit of a reminder of how difficult hospitality would be for most of the world throughout most of the ages. We live in a very affluent society. And there's been a television doco on one of the shows, and it's been called Back in Time for Tea, and they took this family back 100 years and had them eating the meals that their great-grandparents would have eaten, and living in a house that their great-grandparents would have lived in. And I think the family got a surprise when they went through the meal. And this particular evening they sat down to dinner and there was one rasher of bacon to be shared amongst a family of 5. And that stunned me to think that. And then you think back and you hear tales of bread and dripping and say you put salt and pepper on top of it. And yeah, I'm getting a few nods in the head, yes. You know, I've never tasted bread and dripping. And that's beautiful. Like, everyone says that. Oh, that's really nice. Now, to do hospitality today, where we have our fridges stuffed full of food, and our cupboards stuffed full of stuff, is not that hard for us. But I think it would have been incredibly difficult for those families. Imagine a family of 5 sitting down with one rasher of bacon, and they bring a guest into their house. And now instead of 5 people eating one little rasher of bacon, there's now 6. That is sacrificial living. Well, what about the cup of cold water? You know, we read in our Bibles, blessed be the cup of cold water, and say, we go, oh yeah, that's no big deal. Grab a cup out of the cupboard and walk over and yeah, have a cup of cold water. But no, houses with plumbing and running water are relatively new. That cup of cold water would have been carried from a well maybe several hundred metres from the house in a jug. And so that becomes a cost, a sacrifice, a gift from the home. And so in not neglecting hospitality, these people who are living on Scarron are demonstrating a level of commitment and love that I cannot begin to get my head around. I love this bit. It says, for in doing this, many have unawares entertained angels. And that delights me, the thought that maybe, Michael or Gabrielle may have one day sat at my table. I don't know. However, it's a more open term than that. An angel can be a human messenger as well. And sometimes people finish up in places where they do ministries, unaware that they would have that opportunity or even that call, and yet God has known. Michelle and I are going to Tasmania in we're going to watch our grandson be baptised. But I wonder if we will have the opportunity to speak the word of the Lord to someone there. And that in our going there, that might be part of God's plan for the salvation of that person. I don't know. Only God knows those things. But God is organising those things, and that is great. It moves on. Remember those who are prisoners, as though you are bound with them, and share with them in their mistreatment of their bodies. You know, last week we heard about what had happened in Sri Lanka. We had Simon here. And I don't know about you, I was deeply touched by a couple of those photos. And it wasn't the gruesome one with the blood on the statue of Jesus that got to me. The one that got to me was where it was taken from the side of the church, that side of that church, and where you were sitting over there was a whole bunch of young girls. What were they? 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. Probably would have been about 30 of them. And on that side of the church were the boys, and they weren't quite as clearly in focus, but you could see these girls, these young girls sitting there. And we're looking at that photo, and Simon says, 15 minutes after this photo was taken, that bomb went off that killed, I forget how many people. And you realise that a lot of those faces that we were looking at were victims of that bomb just a few minutes later. As Christians, there are people that are suffering for the name of Jesus around this planet. In Nigeria, Christians are being systematically slaughtered. Their farms being taken over because they claim the name of Jesus. In Syria, we're just beginning to see Christians beginning to go back to their homes after those years of terror, about 5 years of terror they lived under, where thousands of them were put to death, others brutally beaten, women raped. Terrible things happen. And they are our brothers and sisters in Christ. And we need to be holding them dear in our heart and praying and caring about them. And where possible, if we have the opportunity, doing things for them. The list goes on. We get to verse 4. Marriage is honourable in all, and the bed is undefiled. But God will judge, and I've got here, the homosexual and the adulterer. And I'm going to go through and explain that. That is a verse that for many years in the Christian church, or in the past 500 years while we've had the English language and English Bibles, initially when this verse was translated, the big issue there was marriage being sacred and the bed being undefiled, and that marriage would be held in high esteem because the church was going through a period of rebellion against Rome. We were in the Reformation, and I don't know that we understand quite clearly how brutal and how harsh and how difficult a time that was. I was reading this week of the Huguenots, and they were around in the 1570s, about 30 years before our Bible was translated into English. And the Huguenots were French Protestants. And I think it was 1573, don't quote me on that, but it was around that period of time. A great persecution broke out against the Huguenots. According to Catholic sources, that there were Christians killed there, maybe about 2,000 in total in France over the period. We know that there were 1,100 bodies pulled out of the River Seine. There were many more found in the streets of Paris, another 900 from Lyne, another 1,400 from Marseille. You can see it does 70,000 is what traditionally we believe. French Protestants were put to the sword that year. And so there was a real feeling that the church had been wrong. And this was seen as a very anti-Catholic passage, because the Catholic Church for a long time had taught that celibacy was the highest of all callings. And so that the priests, because they weren't married, were more holy than the congregation because they were sinners, because they were married. And the Protestant church said, no, that is not true. That marriage is a holy estate. And there is nothing wrong with the marriage bed. And so this had been very much focused on that. And the rest of the verse just sort of flowed through. And they got to this next bit, and they had this word here, koines. And it's a masculine word. And it's related to the selling of flesh for sexual gratification. And so in your old King James Bible and your Revised Standard Version and a few other Bibles like that, it'll use the word whoremonger. Because, a fishmonger sells fish, what does a whoremonger sell? And so that word would have been translated there. But as we've moved on, we've realised that what we would call a pimp today is probably not someone who's going to be in a church. And so it's not something we confront Christians over. Why would James be saying, don't be a pimp? But then, as we looked at it too, homosexuality was not practiced in Reformation England. From 1583 to 1861, anyone caught as a homosexual died on the gallows. So they really did not have a problem with it in those days. It didn't happen. From 1861 to 1967, it was still a criminal act which would get someone many years in jail. They were certainly in the closet if they existed at all. And in fact, the term homosexual was never even used in the English language until the 1890s. And so, when they came to translating our Bible, they had this word that they didn't have a word for, but we have a word for it today. It is homosexual. And what he is saying is that it is holy for a man and wife to have a sexual union. But anything outside of that, whether it be with someone of the same gender as yourself, or someone you're not married to, homosexuality or adultery, that about covers it all. That is not on. God will judge them. One of the things we're not told today is that every day, on average, 1 million people around the world, 1 million people, that is 380 something million actually, each year, and last year it was up around 383 million people, contracted sexually transmitted infections. We used to call it venereal disease, then we called it sexually transmitted disease. Now it's STIs, sexually transmitted infections. 1 million people a day are getting that because we are not upholding that Christian value as a society of monogamy and holding the marriage bed. 1 man, 1 woman, a lifetime commitment to each other. And we beat the problem, but it doesn't happen. Next one, I felt a little bit reprimanded on the next one. It says, do not covet or do not desire riches or something to that manner. The manner of riches, it's talking about desiring things materially. And it says, be satisfied with your present circumstances, for he himself has said, never will I leave you or forsake you. Well, I've got a confession to make. Earlier this week, I got an email, and it was telling me about a new bike, push bike that had been released. And I looked at this push bike, and it looked absolutely magnificent. You know, about every 10, 15 years, how things go through a transition, and there's whole new technologies involved, and because this thing's got hydraulic brakes instead of cable brakes, and because it's got electric gear shifting instead of cable gear shifting, everything's internal on it, and it just looked absolutely splendid. And I thought, wow, that is a beautiful bike. I'd love to have a bike like that. I'd love to ride it. If you want to know the price on it, it's about $11,000. Yeah, didn't even get to the stage where I said to Michelle, I said, you know, hey, I'd really love to have that. Yeah, you know. But, and then I went and read in the Bible and it says, don't be covetous. You know, I've got a fantastic push bike that I really love riding, hanging on the wall. Maybe I'd do better to ride that a bit more often. Yeah, so it's easy for us to get caught up in the wants. There are things that glitter. There are things that pull at our heartstrings. But you know what? In another 50 years, it will be an ornament in a museum if it's still around. And that's the truth. Yeah. But Jesus, he's with us always. And he said, never will I leave you or forsake you. He's going to be there with us through thick and through thin. He is there in our times of plenty, and he is there in our times of need. Let's move on. So that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do to me. I want to tell you, I want to retranslate that. And I want to say the Lord is my rescuer. Because when it talks about help, it is really talking about lifting us up when we're in times of trouble. You know, but when we read that word helper, it takes on a more servitude sort of meaning. You know, a bit like a Girl Friday. You know, Miss Jones, come in, bring me in a cup of coffee and take some dictation, will you please? No, that is not how we have a relationship with God. God is not Miss Jones who comes and makes us coffee and takes dictation. God is the one who rescues us in our times of trial. I read this week, there's a woman, I have no understanding why. I think I understand, if I read the article correctly, she wanted to commit suicide. She was on a Mediterranean cruise. Oh, I'd love to go on. No, whoops, back to the last verse. I better not say that. But she was on a Mediterranean cruise and she jumped overboard while they were at sea. I think she wanted to kill herself. And one of the crew members dived in and swam up to her and held her up until they could get a boat around to pull her back in and rescue her. And I think God is like that crew member, that when we find ourselves in those places where we just cannot cope, he is that hand that holds us up. He is that encouraging word that says, I am there. He is that one who gets in behind us, who gets there beside us. He's the one that lifts us up when we cannot walk. And so when I read that, I want to say, the Lord is my rescuer. I will not fear what man shall do to me. What man shall do to me. And that is something we need to be aware of. That life is not always going to be fair. Life is not always going to be good. Life is not going to always be kind, because we live in a world full of people who are not fair, who are not good, who are not kind, and take delight in bringing suffering to other people. And so we will have those times of hardship. But it is God who will get us through, because this is not the end. This is only just a chapter in the story of eternity as we go on, and we will one day be in glory with Him. Remember those who lead you, who have spoken the word of the Lord to you, who are giving proper thought to their conversation for the outcome of their lives. Imitate their faith. Wow, that is a powerful one. This is calling on people like me to live a life worthy so that congregations might imitate me. Wow. That's scary to think that you should look at me as to how you should live. That scares me. But let's bring it to an end. And what glorious words we've got here. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Later on, we will read that this is the eternal covenant when Jesus Christ shed his blood for the forgiveness of sin. And if it is the eternal covenant, then there is nothing to replace it. The promise of God continues throughout the ages, and the salvation of souls remains the same today as it did on that very first Easter Sunday, when thousands first gave their hearts to the Lord. And it will remain until the day of the Lord's return that there is no other gospel, there is no other hope, that there is no other way forward other than Jesus Christ, our Lord. He is the same yesterday,